Going live. Hello.
Hey, watching on YouTube, you might want to fast forward 5 minutes because we're going to be figuring out technical issues for the next 5 minutes. There you go.
Great disclaimer.
So did it give you a YouTube link there?
Didn't come up overtly, but something tells me it's around. Should I just link to my channel? I think that it's going to be broadcasting it from there. But I don't want this to be any sort of precedent for the future. You guys deserve all this traffic.
Oh, no. Whatever. Our YouTube channel's not really a branded thing at this point. Yes, go ahead and, well, let's look up your channel and see if it's actually there.
My channel. Live now. I got it.
Computer is being faster than mine.
All right.
Channel.
So I have the link, Mark. What do you want me to do with it?
I don't think I got the right Stephen West. The Exploration Station Section 2? Not you.
No, it's not me.
How do I look it up? Philosophize this?
No, just look for Stephen. I mean, I'm not very noteworthy. I don't know if this is you trying to attack me.
No.
There are so many of them, I can't find.
By the way, if I ever start something called Exploration Station, just put me out of my misery. Put a bullet in my head so that I don't have to actually broadcast out of that.
Okay, so here, Mark, I'm gonna send you the link on Google Plus for
Here, I'll post it in chat.
Okay, good plan.
I just want the URL so I can put it, or you could put it on the Facebook page right now if we want to have. If you want to open it to non-members just to watch.
Yeah, it's in chat right now.
Oh, sorry.
Hello.
That's the easiest way. Hello. That's Cam that just showed up.
Yes, hello.
Welcome.
Cam.
Thank you.
We're figuring out technical issues. A couple more minutes here. We need to have a live band to start off. I have the drum set right there.
There you go.
What kind of music do you play, Mark? I mean, I've heard the sample tracks that get handed out when you buy premium content, but
Hello, that's Cam that just showed up.
Yes, hello.
I'm listening to myself on your YouTube channel. Okay. I was being confused there for a second.
It was a little deja vu, Mark.
Wow.
All right, so I'm going to post this to the Facebook page. So talk amongst yourselves.
What do you guys think about President Obama and how he's ruining the country? Everything that he does makes our country worse.
Everything.
Man, everything. Whenever he speaks
Sounds
into
like
the
a good
microphone,
start there, Stephen.
It just makes the flag a little bit less red, white, and blue. A little bit more dim every word that he says. Ah, man.
Just more pastel colored.
Yeah. It's like the Easter American flag. That's what Obama's hanging up with his socialist propaganda. I hate that, man. Don't quote me on that. I forgot this is going out live. People are going to think I'm serious. The joke's on me. Oh, man. So, we need to be entertained. Cam, how are you?
I'm
so
good.
To
How are
meet
you?
I'm wonderful.
Yeah.
Good to see the top of your head, Cam.
So,
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I'll try and arrange it so it...
You're named after a Cam, and ironically, your Cam is not doing very well right now. It's only
Yeah.
your hair.
So where's everybody
How's
located?
Austin, Texas.
Austin, Texas. So Alan, am I right to hear that you had a discussion with Seth recently because you guys are in the same city?
Yes, I did.
That's great.
Cool. All right. It is now 1 o'clock. Oh, too many. All right. Saying too many pinned posts.
You need to unpin something.
I do, but made my new post disappear.
Okay.
All right, so I'll keep messing with this. Stephen, why don't you just, since it's now 1 o'clock and maybe we'll have some more people join, maybe we won't, but go ahead and do whatever introduction you want to do and pretend that this is the beginning of the actual recording that we're going to post.
Okay. Let me put myself in that mental place. Okay, here we go. 3, 2. Hello, and welcome to the Aftershow, the Partially Examined Life podcast, a podcast about a few guys that at one point decided to do philosophy for a living, and then thought better of it, and then thought about it again, decided to do it for a living, and that's why we're here today. I'm Stephen West. That's Mark Linsenmeyer. I believe Dylan is in the audience as well.
Hola.
Would it behoove us for me to explain what this whole train wreck is going to be so that people can understand what to expect on future episodes? Do you think I should do that?
Do it.
All right.
Correct you when you're wrong.
All right. Well, something that we all have in common, all the people listening to this recording right now, is that we all love the Partially Examined Life. It's a wonderful show. Why wouldn't you really? It's the greatest minds in the philosophical world all coming together talking about stuff week after week. But at the end of any 2-hour segment, you kind of, you feel like you're more of an expert on a subject, but really it only kind of serves to give a skeleton of information. It doesn't really serve to answer the questions that you have about that subject or to flesh it out. That's what this podcast is. It's an after show. Its job is to answer any questions that you have, make that skeleton into a full-bodied human with muscles and skin and organs and all the rest of the stuff that comes on a skeleton. And, yeah, that's what this is. So, really, it's kind of weird because what I just did only serves to help people that are going to turn this off right now. It's kind of weird. Anyway.
So it's like The Talking Dead.
Yes, the Talking Dead. We are the untalented people after the truly talented people get done talking.
Those who can do, those who can't come to the after show.
Should we go around, since there's few enough of us this time? This is the test run. This is the unpromoted, other than to members, test run. So let's just go around. Alan, introduce yourself, and Cam and Nick and...
Hi, Alan Cook in Austin, Texas. Do I need to say more than that?
No, you don't. Hello.
Okay.
Cam, what's up?
I'm Cam Gill in London, England.
And a beautiful English accent. Is that Liverpool?
No, that is an authentic London accent.
See, that's my ignorant American question whenever somebody has an English accent. I just say, is it Liverpool? And then if I'm right, then I'm a genius. If I'm not, then I'm just an American who is not cultured. Nick,
Yeah,
where are you from?
a Liverpool accent would have been a good call.
Don't all ones sound like Ringo. They all sound like Ringo.
List off any place in England that you know, and you have a good chance. I'm Nick. I am from BC, Canada. The hat of America.
Man. And I'm the head of America, if you're the hat, because I'm in Washington. Seattle.
All right.
Beautiful place. So, let's talk about Karl Jaspers. That's the reason we're all here, right? I mean, enough with the pleasantries, a disingenuous conversation. None of us really care about each other or where we're from. Let's talk about Jaspers.
This has been bugging me. Is it Jaspers or Jaspers?
Yeah, Jaspers. That's
Jaspers,
right.
but it's one of those things that we decided not to care.
Yeah, this is this is the paradox of saying anything in the proper way that it's pronounced where it comes from. Is if you say it correctly, you sound pretentious, but if you say it like an American, you sound dumb. It's kind of like Genghis Khan or Leonidas or anything like that.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll just roll with it. Okay.
Yeah. Let's just say Jaspers and revel in our own American ignorance. Except for you, Cam. You're an English ignorant person. Anyway, Jaspers.
Yeah, I am reveling in it though. So.
Would it be Jaspers?
Yeah.
So if you go to Google Images and you type in Karl Jaspers, I welcome anybody to go and do that right now and just look into the man's eyes.
He's a serious-looking guy.
If you don't turn to stone instantly, like this man looks like he got an eye transplant from Hitler. Like Hitler was an organ donor, and you're just staring into the eyes of evil when you look at him. And in the same way that Jasper, I've never met anybody named Jaspers before, and I feel like it's something that could be etched on the outside of a haunted mansion. And nobody knows much about old man Jaspers up there on the hill. It kind of is this elusive, haunting aura that he has about him, and in a weird way, his philosophy, at least the concept of transcendence, or the transcendent, is haunting and elusive as well. I feel like when I'm reading it, I'm chasing a ghost, like I'm never actually supposed to understand what the fuck he's talking about fully. Like I'm supposed to kind of get it, but then I'm not supposed to totally know what it is. It's supposed to remain ambiguous, and I think he does that purposefully.
Yeah, I hope so, because I found, I enjoyed reading him, but I had to reread sections over and over again because I couldn't tell if he was just kind of screwing with the reader. It was like, what is your point? Maybe that's just continental. I'm not used to reading continental, but It was like really poetic, but I had no idea what he was talking about most of the time.
Yeah. Mark, do you think he
Yeah.
leaves this open? Do you think he makes it ambiguous purposefully so that it can't be packaged up into dogma? I think that's a point that somebody made on the original podcast.
Of what the
Yeah,
trend is,
sorry.
yeah, maybe, but he does go in much more length, of course, in his different works. I think this really was just a difficult reading because it was so summarial.
Yes. But, I mean, to be fair about the concept of transcendence, he uses multiple words to describe it throughout all of his works. I mean, I think 6 or 7 different words to describe this very abstract concept of being. He uses God, he uses the all-encompassing and things like that. I mean, I don't know. I'm just going to start rambling if I keep talking. But
No, I mean, because Mark had mentioned in the podcast too that like he had written like huge tracts, but this is all really condensed essays, right? And Reason and Existence is like what, lecture notes or condensed lectures? Like it's not his full written work.
Yeah, that's lectures as well. I mean, the one that we actually read was this On My Philosophy, which was recommended as sort of the
And that was really condensed.
right. A good introduction. It was in a compilation. Like from rationalism to existentialism from Dostoevsky to Sartre, I believe, is the compilation I got it out of. But it's sort of after the fact, like many of these philosophers do, where they write their magnum opus and then re-explain it several more times. This is
yeah, so this is a concept that he originally laid out pretty early in life, and then over the decades sort of fleshed it out. I mean, that's something that's fascinating to me. Jaspers is really this person, at least to me, and maybe you guys can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like he's somebody ultimately that arrives at a place where we're at in this human condition that we're born into. And then he presents sort of a roadmap, although it can't really be considered a roadmap because this concept of existence, the penis enlargement pill for the philosophers, is so. I mean, actually, that's a state of mind that you get in, and you're ultimately striving for transcendence, right? Like I mean, when we realize the limitations of empiricism, of scientific inquiry, we're kind of born into a fault. You know, this seems like I'm a professor right now that's rambling about nothing. Maybe I should have you guys ask questions. I mean, I kind of want to keep this organized. So, Cam, what's your ultimate question?
Or say the things that you would want to say had you been on the original conversation. We're not saying that this is the purpose of these things is for you guys to ask us the experts. It's not one of those things.
We will solve Karl Jaspers today.
Yes. So maybe we should start with the people that were, motivated to come onto this call to begin with. Do you think that's a good idea? And then we can all kind of discuss their questions.
Or I think, just interject whatever,
It's a small enough group right now. We can do that.
All right, cool. Well, go ahead. I feel like I'm totally monopolizing the conversation, and I feel terrible.
So I guess what struck me when I was listening, and also when you were talking just now, was the sort of the links to Kierkegaard, to the idea that however sort of advanced or sophisticated your philosophy becomes, once you sort of nail it down and it becomes like a fixed dogma, then you effectively you've sort of given up and you've ceased to engage in sort of philosophical activity. So I guess that sort of fits with what you were saying about not really understanding what he's talking about. Is if he just lays out to you what existence means, then you've sort of given up trying to create a concept of it for yourself. I don't know if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. It's exactly how I feel. The concept of constantly searching for this elusive moving target. I feel like it's almost like I'm starting in San Diego and I'm moving on this path. Like Jaspers tells me that I need to go on this road trip, but he doesn't tell me where I need to go. In fact, it's kind of like the Amazing Race where the target just keeps kind of moving all around the place. And through correspondence with friends and family and people that will reinforce the progress that I make, I need to stop at every gas station along this road and ask people for directions. Where to, I don't know.
Yeah.
No, wait a minute. Was that a metaphor for life or for reading Jaspers?
That's a really good point. No, I think it's a metaphor for Jaspers.
Okay, Jaspers.
Man, once we're in this human condition where we understand the limitations of empiricism and the fact that religion, or at least dogmatic thinking in that way, is not going to be sufficient. It seems like philosophy's role to Jaspers, the real profound point that I think he makes, actually it might not be profound, depending on your opinion, but I feel like really what he's doing is he's redefining what philosophy is. Instead of it being a sort of a pursuit of reading what people in the past have said, it becomes sort of a personal quest that you embark on. And it's a quest that will never end. I mean, even if you reach this level of transcendence, or you reach existence, my favorite brand of hair extension, ultimately that's not the end-all, be-all place to arrive. I mean, it is a constant pursuit of being a more authentic person, correct?
Yeah, and actually it made me think of, like, he's sort of advocating, like, ancient philosophy, right? Like, it used to be, like, Plato and Socrates were concerned with being better people, right? And the Republic can be seen as like, allegory for that. But they also seem to be actually concerned with constructing, worldviews, whereas it seems like Jaspers really wants to avoid having any, like, communal agreement, and just wants to have the, like, contemplation. But I also found it really confusing as to what he meant by reason. Because he seems pretty reasonable, but he's using reason at, like, capital R reason. He doesn't want anyone to be that reasonable or something. Like, I didn't quite get, he's written so many books, but he says, don't think about it too hard.
Yeah.
It's not don't think about it too hard. It's if you think about it as much as you can think, then you realize you're at the limits of language. You realize that you're at the limits of reason. So when Wittgenstein gets to the point where he's basically saying, well, really none of what I've been saying should be able to be said, or anything really important can't be said here, or there are lots of philosophers that kind of get to that point. With Plato, it is getting, you can, the whole idea, can virtue be taught? That what ultimately you want to get at, the form of the good, and so that's not something, so there's a big question in Plato's scholarship. Is the whole thing really just kind of a front for some secret teaching that only you could only get esoteric teaching by having certain mystical experiences, and that all Plato's dialogues are supposed to just get you in a position to be able to feel the light of the good in that way? So I think that's kind of, there's a lot of different examples of different philosophers who kind of get to this point of stopping, and I think that's just what he's referring to. Reason somehow pulls you beyond reason.
Yeah, and I think he always is talking about that idea that it's only as an individual that you can arrive at the truth. What it really reminds me of, that philosophy in that way is an individual pursuit. What it reminds me of is kind of something that I bet all of you people are familiar with, because you're probably all the smartest people in your immediate group of family and friends. It kind of reminds me of, like, if you have a truck, or if you're really good with computers, like whenever somebody goes to Craigslist and they buy a treadmill or a couch, they always call you first. You're the guy that needs to bring your truck over because they weren't forward thinking. And if they download all the terrible stuff on their computer that causes viruses, and you have to come over and fix their computer. When somebody comes to you guys, I bet you're the first person that they think of when they're asking for advice. But the problem with advice is I don't know if people ever actually follow advice, or if it takes a very extraordinary type of person to follow advice. And I wonder if that's kind of the sentiment that he's getting at, where, I mean, ultimately you can read all about the chronological history of philosophy, the collection of the greatest ideas ever, in my opinion, but are you really ever able to practically put those into use, unless if you have a set of mystical experiences or some sort of experience where you arrive at that truth? Think there's anything to that?
You just have to come to the conclusion yourself, and it's hard to be taught that. I mean, I guess that's sort of the Plato connection, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Is
Mark,
there also an element? Sorry.
I'm sorry, it's just a delay. When I started talking, you weren't talking. It's kind of...
Right.
Cam, what were you going to say, man?
I was going to say there's also an element where, so it seems a lot like, I am rambling now. I was just thinking, when you're talking about when people ask for advice, often what they're looking for is, ways that they can address either a specific situation or they can make themselves happy. But it seems like a lot of philosophy, and certainly sort of Jaspers, it's not really like, he's not even promising that this will make you happy. In fact, a bit like Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, he's promising you'll probably make yourself quite miserable for like a serious section of this process, and you won't necessarily find any resolution. But it'll make you sort of, I don't know, I guess more fulfilled, more realized towards the end, at the end of a never-ending process. And I always sort of wondered, like, so I've occasionally tried to sort of live by principles derived from philosophy, and I've only ever found it's made my life sort of more difficult. But there's still a sort of, I guess, a sort of a nagging feeling that I should be doing this. And I guess that sort of feels like what he's getting at. That he's not going to provide you with any solutions or even a particularly sort of useful roadmap. But the best you'll get is like a sort of one level up meta way of thinking about your life.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's something else to consider, something that I was thinking about as I was reading, and maybe one of you guys can clear this up for me. I feel like he kind of presents his whole, like, the condition that we're born into as human beings, where we're ultimately going to realize the limits of empiricism, the limits of scientific inquiry, and when we're at that point, we're faced with a choice. Either we can take a leap of faith towards the transcendent, or we can sink into despair and misery. But you don't have to look very far around you to realize that not many people ever arrive at that level that he's talking about. I mean, is that a false dichotomy? And is there also, I mean, billions of people in the world that don't even really consider the limits of scientific inquiry and whether there is some ultimately more authentic, better way to live?
Well, I mean, he talks about scientists at one point in the other essays as being like, that they could go to their grave hoping that they could live longer and learn more and more and more, but that wasn't really self-fulfilling. So I don't know, he doesn't really talk about happiness explicitly from what I read, but it seems like he's saying the point isn't to sort of fill yourself up with knowledge, but to sort of think better. And I guess that the suggestion is that would help you generally, right? Reaching that state would help you, that couldn't not help you. That's sort of what I got from it.
Yeah. Mark, what do you think about that?
First, I want to say hello. I see you have a Ammo just joined.
Hello.
Where are you from?
I'm speaking from Toronto in Canada.
All right.
He's like a Canadian.
So I just sent out an email to the entire citizenry inviting anybody else wanted to jump on. So
Right. I just got that.
great. So I don't remember your question, Stephen.
Well, that's probably because it's not very significant. Let's move on to Amok. How do you pronounce your name?
Amok.
Wow.
There you go.
What ethnicity are you? That's wonderful.
I am originally from India, but my family is partly British as well.
Wow. The two, I mean, that's like Anglo-Saxon and Aryan combining. That's beautiful. It's the pinnacle of human thought. So what question do you have for us?
I was listening to the podcast. It's quite interesting about Jaspers, and I wanted to know, the word worldview was thrown about quite a lot at the beginning, and I wanted to know what exactly was meant by that. And then when you're talking about Jaspers suggesting that scientific discovery and so on doesn't constitute a worldview, would that relate to ethics, or I mean, what would you describe as a worldview?
I think no matter how far science can extend, if you went to the ends of the universe, and even if science could complete Wikipedia 100%,
Right.
they knew everything there was to know about the facts of the universe, there's still elements to your human experience that it can't address. I mean, there are things about subjective things, like it can't tell you about what it is to be you in certain elements of your life. And I think that what Jaspers is saying is because there's a gap there, philosophy is this individual pursuit that is meant to fill in those gaps. Mark, do you agree?
I no longer remember if he actually used the term worldview. In fact, I'm going to do a search on my... No.
It was definitely used in the podcast.
Yeah.
You guys definitely used it.
I think that was me that started it. But he does... I remember when I said this originally, so I was stressing that science is all about establishing specific truths in specific domains, and they're all hypothetical. If you buy the presuppositions under which this experiment was made, then you will accept these conclusions. But since it's hypothetical, it doesn't give you... Yes, I think ethics would be a part of it, but even just a whole, like, should I be a materialist? What does that mean? Or should I be religious or not? Or what? It seems So I was purposely kind of vague about this in terms of what a worldview means, because that's just one of the terms that we use in our everyday speech. And the way that Paul initially, interrupted me and said, "Oh, you mean, specific versus more general theory," which is actually not what I was talking about, because science can engage in general theories all they want. It's just that it's still a theory about a specific domain. It's never a theory about everything. And of course, you don't need a theory about everything or information about everything in order to have a worldview. What constitutes a worldview in our everyday speech is something much more limited than that. But kind of just general, what makes you think that you're living the way an intelligent person should live? Does science give you that? And I was interested to see whether, like Paul, I think, didn't agree. He thought that, if science tells you that, he gave the example that we're all stardust, we're all descended from the same stuff, then that should give you a certain respect for the Earth and a certain other ethical implications. And then Wes jumped in and sort of started going on about Hume's is versus ought.
Right.
No, strictly speaking, I guess I don't know if I said on the podcast or not. What I thought was that these scientific things, they're necessary for having a worldview, but they're not sufficient. Like, you can always take this, or you could take that very same, well, we're all descended from stardust, and you could be, oh well, but we're the ones who evolved in this special way, and so the fact that we are basically the same stuff as feces means that we shouldn't have any respect for animals just because they're part of that same stuff. Humans still, because they then hit the bar of reason. So you can have very different views, like a very ecological or a very human-centric asshole view of the same scientific finding.
Yeah.
Right.
I think you're making Hume's point about there's nothing contrary to reason to preferring the destruction of the world to lifting your little finger.
Yeah.
I think ultimately, I think that Jaspers is making a sort of like an alternative case to religion here. I think for a long time you had it. I think he sort of foreshadowed the false dichotomy that the layman is born into nowadays. I know nobody listening to this thinks that this is a true dichotomy, but a lot of people are born into the world and they feel like they have two options. They can become a devoutly religious person, some modern variant of monotheism. They believe there is an anthropomorphized God in the sky that has a plan for them, or they can believe that Richard Dawkins created the world in 7 days. All of that stuff. But ultimately what Jaspers is talking about is that I think he's pointing out that science, no matter how extensive it gets, will never be totally sufficient. It will never answer all the questions that we can have about this human experience, and that philosophy and this pursuit that he lays out after that is meant to fill in the gaps.
It seems like we're talking about ethics here when we talk about worldview. Is it basically the is-ought distinction, right? You can have all the scientific discoveries that you have, but they don't presuppose any kind of ethics. They don't provide any foundation for ethics. So is it just the question of crossing that gap, and some people do it in terms of religion?
I would think ethics is a part of your beliefs that would make up a worldview. The worldview.
I see.
That's just my take. That if you asked a regular person who doesn't read a lot of philosophy, sort of, what's your philosophy of life? And then they would give you something that would roughly correspond to their worldview. And some of that might be, you should be nice to people, whatever. I remember when I saw Monty Python's The Meaning of Life, and they hardly ever talk about the meaning of life, and eventually there's like a waiter character that says, well, I think the meaning of life is just be nice to people or whatever, and then he kind of gets
exercise a lot.
He gets defensive talking to the camera, like, well, I know it's not a very good philosophy, fuck you, or whatever. We don't know what to expect out of a philosophy. But it definitely, I think there's more to it than just immediately. That's the practical versus theoretical distinction, which actually we're reading Gadamer now for the next one after Whitehead, and he's following right on Jaspers and Heidegger about this very same thing. That a lot of what Jaspers was pushing forward, and that Gadamer gives in more detail, is that being into philosophy is having some patience for thinking that is not immediately practical, whereas ethics. If you think what you need to get out of philosophy is just tell me what to do, like, well, there's got to be more to a worldview or to philosophy than that.
Yeah. Perhaps
it has something to do with ontology then, in this kind of Heideggerian sense, rather than ethics purely, in the way we think about it in terms of, deontology versus consequentialism.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe it has something to do with, because Buddhism kept being brought up. So perhaps it has something to do. It has the worldview thing has an ontological meaning rather than an ethical meaning.
Or perhaps it's. I mean, I thought it was interesting that Mark pointed out that if you ask people about their philosophy, they'll often tell you they'll give you ethical statements. But I think actually, if you ask people, I might be wrong about this, but I think if you ask people sort of what's your philosophy, quite often they will give you ethical statements and they'll ground it in an interpretation about the world. So they'll either say,
Right.
It's dog eat dog out there. Everyone's out to get each other. So therefore, I don't give a crap about X. Or they'll say, well, fundamentally we're all people. Everyone's equal. Therefore, I think you should give to charity, not eat meat, whatever. Quite often, even if sort of, I think people don't instinctively go along with Hume that you can't derive an ought from an is. I think most people will at least seek to ground what they consider to be an ought in what they consider to be an is.
Yeah, at least there is a God who tells us stuff. Therefore, we should do.
Right.
There isn't a God. Therefore, we can do whatever the fuck we want. One of those.
Right. But of course, Hume would say that there's a leap being made there, right? I mean, it's not. Yeah.
All
So
right.
even if they think X, they could be making a mistake.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Very true.
Also, isn't it also just a matter of that science, if it doesn't give you certainty, if it only gives you specific results about specific things in a specific domain that are hypothetical based on, like I was saying, then it doesn't tell you, for sure that other people exist. Like that. It seems like, based on all the experiments, that if you hit somebody, they hit you back, and that other people exist. But there's still, to get a worldview that other people exist and matter. Apart from the is-ought distinction, it still takes a leap of, from the results of induction to acting as if it were certain. Some pragmatically.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. That's what I was just going to bring up as the limits of induction. So, Alan, you've been kind of quiet. Do you have a point of discussion that we could talk about? Anything that's interesting to you?
I think I'll choose to remain silent for a little. Actually, I take that back. I did have an observation. A few minutes ago, we were talking about how Jaspers seems to say that philosophy is not merely the study of the philosophical tradition, but a personal quest. What struck me was that there seemed to be a place in the reading where he was saying that personal quest will necessarily lead you back to the philosophical tradition. I mean, I detected a hint of sort of elitism there, that we philosophers who sit down and read all this stuff are the only people who are really fully living or fully engaged in this struggle for meaning in our lives or whatever. I was wondering if anyone else detected that.
I think he's right. I'm just going to agree with Jaspers here.
That's something that we were trying to deal with at the end of the podcast. That I started off, saying yes, I think Jaspers think that, but then toward the end thought he can't actually think that. That he if he's so down on, exclusivist religion, and this is the only way to God, to the transcendent, then he must be open to people who are not of a scholarly bent, having some way of getting to authentic truth. And I think that's partly why he has such tolerance for religion, and it even goes beyond, I think, the apophatic, purely religion can't be put into words, God is ungraspable kind of religion. He has actual tolerance for real religion. With he just hates if it's exclusive. He hates if it's hateful. The kind of stuff that we would probably not like about religions as well. But that there's something real going on there. He considers Jesus and Buddha as as key parts of the philosophical tradition. They are among the figures that he analyzes in his long books where he's talking about other philosophers. So I think he needs to be open to other ways of getting at something worthwhile. But maybe it's a matter of this: if you don't learn history, you're doomed to repeat it kind of thing. So that if you are just more authentically, individually spiritual and don't care about reading anything, then you're going to be reinventing the wheel. You're going to be missing out on a lot of great stuff.
Well, maybe this is something that I didn't understand when I was reading it. I thought that he said that you could arrive at that state of transcendence, that dogmatic religion was one path to get there, and that his path was the way that the philosophers arrived there. Is that what he said? I thought that's what he said.
That may be right. I don't recall. And also, we brought up art or even comedy or other ways of being authentically yourself.
Yeah. It reminded me of what Sam Harris is doing. I mean, we brought up Richard Dawkins. You guys brought it up on the call, but I think the four horsemen of the atheist apocalypse, of them, he is probably the most. Well, at least in my opinion, he's the one that I like the most, because whenever he comes out with a book, he attacks one of these things that religion claims to have a complete monopoly on. And he wrote The Moral Landscape. Obviously, this is nothing new to people like us that read philosophy, but he lays out a set of moral principles that you can live by, or a moral code that has nothing to do. It's not founded in the decree of some supernatural God. And in his most recent book, Waking Up, he attacks the idea of transcendent spiritual experiences. He says that all of the followers of these religions throughout history have claimed to have these experiences. So what is it? It must be a process of the brain. And he says you can arrive at that through meditation and through contemplation and yoga and different stuff like that.
Drugs.
Maybe I'm getting off topic.
He was just on the Very Bad Wizards podcast talking about his drug experiences with.
Yeah, psychedelic drugs. That's another path to it, right?
Yeah.
Sort of this. I believe Jaspers calls it an Augenblick. I don't speak German, but it's this idea of experiencing eternity in one fleeting moment. This transcendent touching with the. I can't even describe it. But then again, the first rule of the transcendent is that you can't talk about the transcendent, because if you do, you're just wrong. And by the way, I'm going to use 7 different words to describe it. Even I don't understand it. That part of Jaspers makes me want to hang myself with a belt. Anyway, we have a new person on the call.
Oh, it's just Nick is rejoining.
I had PC troubles there, so I'm back.
Yes. So what we've covered since you've been gone is that Jaspers is an angry man that became a psychiatrist to figure out what was wrong with him when he was a young boy, and that I want to hang myself with a belt. Do you have any questions, Nick?
This is a good conclusion.
On a topic.
This is why we're doing this sort of fleshing out process, is we all need to arrive at what our inner demons.
I do wonder, like, if his background as a psychiatrist had a lot to do with, like, the sort of secondary work makes a point to say that he's not trying to do psychiatry in his or psychology in his philosophy, but he has this huge emphasis. I mean, that's why he's lumped in as an existentialist on subjective experience. He seems to hate anything. He agrees with objective science, but any sort of agreement on ideas is just like anathema to him. I wonder, does anyone know if there's any background to, like, I don't know. There's got to be some influence on. He seems to be in the mode of a psychologist in a way that, like, this was like Popper's criticism of, like, psychoanalysts, is that you can't reproduce what people tell you they feel, right? But Jaspers wants to sort of get people to a state where they are in a great place, but they can't explain it to anyone.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead. It's okay.
Okay. No, I was just going to ask, did people detect the same, when I read Kierkegaard and people like that, there seems to be a lot of contempt for philosophers, capital P. And, I mean, if in his case, people like Hegel, I wonder if Jaspers, considering we talked a lot about the value of philosophy, it comes out, do people think that he would have the same kind of contempt?
I don't think at all. I think he thinks that was a misguided strain in. Come on, everybody thinks, even if Kierkegaard is railing against philosophy, Kierkegaard is a philosopher. Come on.
Yeah.
That's just a specific kind.
That's what's good about Jaspers as someone who's a little more sophisticated in certain ways than Nietzsche or Kierkegaard is that if you have as broad a take on the history of philosophy that he does, then it just makes you a little more charitable, generous, that you don't get into this, that's not really philosophy, or that's kind of what we've tried to achieve on this podcast.
Yeah, I think that's a good explanation. Hey, I have a question. This is something I was thinking about. What do you guys think about the whole communication thing? Because here's what I think, and you guys can berate me and clarify this for me, because I feel like I don't know. I feel like a miserable failure when I'm reading Jaspers. I feel like the communication thing is just like a safety net for existentialism. I don't really think he thinks that nobody could ever possibly arrive at this state of existence. The first album by Boyz II Men, whatever you call existence. Like I feel like he thinks that communication. He leads on for communication to be this really important part of the process, so that people can shine a light on your own delusions, so that you don't the common criticism against existentialism that Mark laid out in the podcast, the idea that one day you could say, I don't think that beating my kids is the right thing to do, and then the next day he spills a cup of grape juice, he mouths off to you, and you feel like he needs a backhand today. That sort of subjectivity, that sort of like malleable nature, I think, I wonder if it's just a safeguard against that. I wonder if it's really an important part of the process.
You seem to be, and I heard people in the podcast also equating communication with authenticity, which is another term that gets tossed around when people are talking about existentialism or not. And is it fair to say that that's how you're understanding communication when you raise that question?
Well, if it's
somehow related to the notion of being true to yourself and being able to be true to other people? That's
no, I mean, part of this process of existence, at least how I understood it, is a active pursuit where you're communicating with other people. And they call you on the delusions and the misguided thoughts that you have on this personal path towards the truth, right?
Okay.
He thought that was a very important part of the process, and I guess I'm wondering if that's really an important part to Jaspers, or if he just kind of says it is because he developed this thought over a period of decades, and people criticized his existentialist founding by, saying that common. Am I dumb here? Come on, guys, tell me that I'm dumb.
That is probably why he and Heidegger both said, "I'm not existentialist." When Sartre made it popular, and these said, "That's not me. I don't know." But I want to hear other people's thoughts on the actual.
Is a thought on that that he would have, pressed the importance of communication because otherwise it would look a bit like solipsism? Is that the idea?
I think that
if you sort of reach the state by yourself, then no one knows. So how do you know if it's working, quote unquote?
I think that if you think of Buddhism as kind of like an alternative to it, where there's a very clear set of actionable behaviors that you do every single day to ultimately arrive at this transcendent state, he has a very ambiguous one where there aren't very many. It's a very personalized, subjective pursuit that you're going on towards truth. And how do you know whether you're being misled? I'd equate it back to my example about the road trip. If you start in San Diego, you don't know where you're going. How do you know you're not heading towards the ocean right now and you're not going towards the destination? So as a means to correct course and to constantly guide you along the right path, you would have to stop at these gas stations and talk to people. But I wonder if it's really that important when it comes to the process, or if he's just kind of, like I said, creating a safety net for existentialism. Go ahead.
I see this as kind of a tension within existentialism itself, because when we talk about existentialism, I think about the philosophical movement which is trying to affirm subjective experience and sort of extricate the philosophical practice from all these binds that it's found itself in, right? So you kind of deconstruct these. I mean, I don't mean deconstruction in the Derridean sense here, but more kind of what Nietzsche does. Deconstruct these meaning systems which loom above you and kind of diminish you in some sense. But by deconstructing everything outside you and focusing on subjective experience, one feels you lose some structure, right? So there's all this. So then you have kind of Kierkegaard goes into his whole thing about the knights of faith and the knights of reason and the teleological suspension of the ethical, and Sartre talks about authenticity and you don't engage in bad faith. It seems to be amongst all of these philosophers, it seems to be kind of where they lose out is the specific acts they recommend to escape to reach the transcendent state, which has so far been kept from you from all the systems outside you which are imposing their logic on you to deny your subjective experience.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. What I was thinking sort of along similar lines, I think, was that I guess its communication functions as a sort of way of it not just becoming a free-for-all, right? So you're not meant to accept dogma from any religious authority or philosophical authority, but you're not meant to just do whatever the hell you like, because that will be ineffective. So as a way of sort of distinguishing what is a productive or an authentic thought from an inauthentic one, or an action that will be sort of appropriate in however so defined manner, or an inappropriate one, you have to have communication where you sort of define what is sort of an appropriate step along the path in conjunction with others, rather than just deciding that, like, because I've eaten a bacon sandwich today, I'm being an authentic person because I have this very special rule I've just come up with where bacon sandwiches are enlightening.
And you also don't want to get into the trap again of, you know, denying yourself. There's always this constant risk that, you know, you might go back into the hell which you've just extricated yourself from, having read Kierkegaard or Jaspers or any of these people, right? You have to keep on this correct path, and that's where it becomes kind of ambiguous for me.
Something else that occurs to me in this regard as to whether communication is genuinely important for Jaspers. You better recall he was a psychiatrist, and so he must have thought that, for at least some of us, talking to at least one other person, namely your shrink, was an important part of this process. I mean, I assume at that time, being a psychiatrist was basically psychoanalytic in orientation. I don't think he was handing out scripts for Zoloft back then. So.
No
Zoloft existed back then. It would have been a much better world. A lot less war, at least. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Because I'm reading Gadamer right now, I'm going to import Gadamer's take is to connect all this to Aristotelian phronesis, right? The practical wisdom. So remember Aristotle's ethics, it's not that Aristotle had a list of this is the stuff you're supposed to do, but he had a list of specific things you could do to make yourself the kind of person who would develop the skill to do the right thing. And so that's really, if you read Jaspers that way, then yeah, okay. So the life of the scholar is at least one path by which you can discipline yourself and make yourself into a good listener and develop your intellectual conscience and just make yourself so that you're not going to make stupid mistakes like joining the Nazi Party. Make yourself into somebody who's worthy to be who is a good citizen. I mean, he really seems to emphasize that, and I referred to a speech that he gave to some when he got a peace prize. The way that he seemed to think that we needed to avoid Nazism or something like in the future is for each person to develop themselves to be good citizens. And I think he does, even though you're right, Alan, he doesn't tell you do this, but you know, he's giving you, at least by example, by inspiration. And not only his own writing, but all the other writers that he points out. I think he's trying to give you, a recipe for at least being on the right path.
You know, his dad was a jurist, and that we all know he had some sort of inferiority complex. He went into college becoming a jurist himself, or at least majoring in law, and then he realized he didn't like it. I guess what I'm saying is, what if Hitler had Zoloft? Would World War II still have happened?
We're downers.
I'm not trying to derail the conversation, but
I mean, Hitler probably had opium, so...
Yeah.
If you're derailing the conversation, you're just acting in the tradition of the original discussion where we had Paul, who was
That's
a
all I'm trying to do.
man who was going this way and that.
So, thank you for clarifying that for me, guys. Aaron, you're in the conversation. You're muted. I can unmute you if you want, but I'd like to welcome you. I'd like to ask you where you're from, and if you have a question.
I don't know. Aaron, along with Nick, is one of our podcast editors, so I was very happy to see him here, but it looks like he is muted and can't figure out how to unmute. So
let's see.
Hello? Mic set up there.
Aaron! Hello, Aaron!
Hi.
Where are you from?
No, I unfortunately don't have a question. I actually was just spying and listening to the conversation. So I actually haven't gotten. Yeah,
I like you looking.
I actually probably have edited more of the Jaspers conversation than I've had a chance to listen to yet. So.
Well, was there any thought that you had coming out of that you wanted? We'll tell you about it.
No, I mean, not right now. I think it was a great show, and I really enjoyed it so far. But no, I don't have anything. I'm just spying at this point. I appreciate it.
What a glowing endorsement to go and listen to the original episode of the podcast, you guys. Mark, does that make you feel?
You'll have no questions after.
The guy editing the show has no edits to make. No sort of like things that should have been there that aren't. You guys are good at this.
The editor that we gave the last portion to, and it was neither Nick nor Aaron, took out all the jokes. He gave it to so there's all the stuff about
that like been short of the podcast then?
How the pancake, most of just stuff that Paul would say. How
the pancake breakfast.
Must be a transcendent pancake breakfast. There was some sort of
That's a cardinal sin. You cannot take out the funny parts of the show. I mean, you can only go for so long talking about the dry, very intellectual part, but then to hear you guys like crack a joke and laugh, it really becomes something more. Like, you know what I mean? It's my favorite part, right?
It's the spoonful of sugar that helps the medicine go down.
Some of it was
Exactly.
because we had cameras on like this, and so there was a lot of like jokes about how Wes was the only one who didn't have a moving camera image, and so let's all try to be very still, just like Wes. Dylan kept disconnecting, and then he would like swear because he couldn't hear us anymore, but we could still hear him. So he would like just interrupt in the middle of our discussion. He would just like fuck. And Dylan he got dropped out of the conversation like 4 times. He was having internet problems. Well, of course we have to edit all that out to
Right.
levity of the time, and even what led into Seth telling a story about some not strip club that he went to.
Oh yeah,
It was like because we were taking a break, and then people start talking, and it's really hard. Whenever anybody says something completely irrelevant, usually somebody relates it back to the reading, so I have to either choose to leave it in or lose.
I mean, but how do you relate Bongo's clown room back to Jaspers?
Yeah.
Like, what?
It should have back to the text if we can.
I think you guys managed.
Let me relate it back here because so Nick asked about the communicate, or you guys were talking, all talking about the communication aspect, and that was the thing. So with what's the connection between authenticity and communication? Well, it's because some of the time when we think we're being authentic, we're being real, we're keeping it real, we're actually just kind of being socially comfortable with each other and might not necessarily understand each other at all. Like that's maybe what's a lot of times happening in churches, that people go there for social reasons, but are they really connecting? Certainly not connecting with the person next to them based on what the sermon is going. Maybe if the sermon keeps basic and stupid enough and like love, then they can feel. But if you start trying to communicate anything sophisticated at all philosophically, it's really hard to even know whether you're being understood.
Yeah,
no one turns to the next person in the pew and starts like, so, like, what's your theological take on that? Like, no, it's just like, let's sing a song now.
Isn't the danger that their theological take is exactly the same as yours because you're in the same church or in the same place, and so I think that was something that was discussed on the show that. In terms of communication, how do you go about forming this ideal and how are you keeping yourself in check, right? If you're going to form this, idea that, hey, to live the best life, I need to do X, how do you keep yourself in check? But if you go to a place with nothing but people who think exactly like you, are you really getting an honest take on it, right? And so the social is important, but perhaps more important is actually going to talk to people who aren't living the same lifestyle that you are, that maybe have a completely different vantage point, right?
Yeah.
But also perhaps when we're talking about institutions like the church and stuff like that, their communication is mediated by codes of conduct and stuff like that, perhaps which are more rigid than other settings. So you run into that objective-subjective thing again.
Yeah, you're not allowed to just break in during the sermon. And
I got a question about this whole God thing.
About the whole God thing, I'm not too sold myself.
Yeah, what about you, Jerry? What do you think? It's like,
call it the transcendence, the encompassing. Can we just not use that word God? Is that okay?
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
I was just thinking it's actually quite like a modern idea of religion that involves everyone believing the same thing. I think there's certainly like one theory about it was up until sort of the Reformation, basically the church, especially the Christian church, wasn't that bothered if everyone believed the stuff. It was like, you had to turn up on the specific days and you had to say the prayers and give a certain amount. And then what you really believed wasn't too important. And then it was only sort of when Protestantism develops, which has a much bigger focus on like the individual confessing himself and, finding his own way to God, that actually like the church suddenly had to start cracking down on some of the batshit crazy stuff that people believed and start saying like, no, this is what we think. Like, he was born of a virgin. It's really important that you nail this down. He was born of a virgin and God is his dad, and like all of this kind of specifics. So actually probably before sort of what, 1600, you could turn to your neighbor in church and they would have some really fucking weird stuff to say on what was being
Yeah.
preached.
Actually, the kind of faith that he seems to be advocating, I mean, struck me as pretty complicated, but what I got from just skimming it was that it reminded me of even polytheism. It's that each city has their own god, and you're like, oh, I hope I don't get struck by lightning if I maybe besmirch his name, but no one. I get the sense that say in ancient Greece, very few people really believed that the gods existed, but it was kind of you could run if you were in trouble, you could run to a temple, no one would come in and hurt you, just in case it was real, but no one was out dogmatizing then. Everyone had their own cult, and it was fine, right?
But did they not believe in that cult? I guess I'm wondering what that's based on, that nobody really believed in the gods. It was just kind of a narrative that...
I think that most of the people that we read didn't very seriously believe in the gods. Who knows what,
It's hard to tell. I mean, you get the sense Thucydides has sort of this ambivalence about it, but he's also, he's a well-educated noble, right? Then you have people like Xenophon, who the Anabasis, he sneezes, and he's like, oh, that's Zeus, right? So
you're talking about the distinction between philosophers believing in the god of the cosmological argument, this abstract concept that must exist outside of space and time, versus the god that sacrificed himself to save us from himself, the literal interpretation.
I think even that if they accepted religion as sort of this therapeutic, communal, social construct that could have been, Mount Olympus could house a bunch of gods, but no one seemed really zealous about it, right? No one really had to tell other people not to believe in something else.
But how is it therapeutic? It's therapeutic to the government that's trying to oppress people, I think. It's not really therapeutic to the individual.
Well, the Greeks are pretty okay with that.
I think we're getting different eras, historical periods, and I mean, there was no state religion in Greece. There was in Rome. But,
there's cities, yes. There's no state religion, but
there was no. I mean, there was sort of a civic. I mean, there were certain public civic rights you were supposed to participate in, but you could also go off and be part of one of the mystery religions as well. And
yes. That's what I mean. That's all I mean is that they didn't. You were kind of free to practice whatever you wanted, unless you were Socrates and you helped someone deface statues, then you had to die.
Yeah, but I think Socrates was very serious about that stuff about his daimonium, But if Socrates, I take him absolutely seriously in the Apology, that's how he justified his activity, was in terms of this Greek folk religion, and that's what his daimonium was calling him to do.
And Jaspers mentions that as well. I had some trouble with that, but he mentions, he's like, hey, look, even Socrates did a lot of stuff just because he had this inner sense about it, the daimon, right?
Right. There was a quote, I didn't bring it up in the podcast because I don't think it was in this particular essay, but that he makes a big deal about the difference between Galileo, who, when challenged by the church, said, okay, fine, I recant, and that was appropriate in a certain way because Galileo was doing science. That it would be undignified to die for something that could be scientifically proven. Whereas Plato, he thought, approvingly, had made the existential jump and was, willing to put himself out on the line for this belief in the diamond, so that there was something that they were actually both acting appropriately. It wasn't that Galileo was the coward. It's just that they were involved in different sort of actions, and so the appropriate amount of resistance is the difference between them.
Yeah. So does anybody have a question about Jaspers? Sorry, I can't even talk right now. So taken aback by what Mark just said.
Or if we don't have Jaspers, I guess I was along the lines of the freedom we were just talking about that Nick brought up. Was what Paul had to say? There was a little point in there where he was trying to argue that we're not free at all, and in this day and age was that Did you understand
Right.
what you're trying to say or find that motivating? I think we kind of stamped on him, but
Well, I mean, I think that a big central theme of Jaspers is this idea of living authentically, of understanding your total freedom as a human being inherently, and that it kind of reminds me of being on a reality show. That's why when I was thinking, I don't know, this is how my brain works. I think of like overarching metaphors to apply to this entire thing. I just think of The Amazing Race, and I think that these people that are on The Amazing Race, as they go around and they interact with people and the cameras are on them, reality TV is never actually reality TV as soon as the cameras are turned on, because they're never going to act like themselves. They're going to act like this image that they want to project. And what Paul was talking about there, I think, is a valid point, is that if ultimately the goal is for us to embark on this personal quest to arrive at truth and to understand our true nature of being fully free, it is corresponding with other people. Is that stopping our ability to actually do that?
I suppose it depends. It seems for Jasper that it depends in which context this correspondence is occurring, right? Because if you unthinkingly talk to other people about random stuff in random contexts, I'm not so sure. That doesn't seem like an act of acknowledging your freedom. Just doing whatever, whatever suits your desires at a certain point at any time, and just chatting someone up on the street about any random topic doesn't seem like it would give you a sense of your freedom. It feels like it has to be deliberately constructed.
Yeah, it has to be this, right? This kind of conversation between intellectuals who are familiar but maybe have different backgrounds. I mean, I went to dinner last night and I had a very pleasant conversation with, somebody who was just a friend of the family, but it was certainly not this level of, introspection and the detail of the conversation going on. This, to me, that was very nice, but this, to me, is much more enjoyable, right? I'm getting more out of this and listening to you than I am talking about, what did you do, what was the day, where's your job at, that kind of thing.
I think that's when people talk about like Sartre, right, and the canonical examples of bad faith, the dinner with the family scenario is kind of seems to be like the example number one whenever you think about bad faith, right? The kind of tense family interaction with forks nervously peeking at food, and no one really wants to know their feelings, etc., etc.
Well, I wonder from Paul, he expressed if we were going to do one on Desaad or some other like sensualist, that we should invite him back. That I think maybe from the point of view of his comedy, if you know the Aristocrats movie, that kind of what he might have had in mind in terms of potentially living authentically, and how you can't do that is, what if you're is this Freudian thing? Freudian civilization is discontent. That maybe living authentically is living how nobody would accept you at the dinner table, how only comedians backstage, whatever they want to say, would fly. That you have to be able. There just has to be nothing that you have to show nominal respect for, whatever. And just the fact that you can't do that in society, at least on a day-to-day basis. Maybe you can on stage. I don't know. That he found that too restricting. That there's something that if you get at the essence of you, that's always going to be something that's antisocial.
And for people like Sartre, right, that was political. You use that. You become. Sartre talks all. I mean, I hate to bring him into the Jaspers reading, but I feel there's some overlaps there. When he talks about, he talks about big P political, right? He keeps talking about this is a true political act, this is a true authentic act, and it seems like. He seems like he agrees with you, and he would say that's the point.
That the political act is one that's going to flout convention.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to get to the point where, I understand, but my concern is in that, if somebody disagrees with me, why just because I'm thinking of different things, or I don't know how to put this, why does that become antisocial? Like, when I think antisocial, I think, well, somebody who's not just polite. Like, I can accept that somebody believes something different than I do and just be fine with that and just say, okay, well, that's great, thank you. I mean, I don't really need to be like, well, fuck you, and then, walk away from the table. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't have to be at that level. You know what I mean? Like, there can be an acceptance. Because I really think that, I'm, personally, I have been an atheist for a long time, but I just wouldn't really bring that up. Or if I have brought that up, I do kind of gauge the conversation and who's at the table and what can I appropriately say that's not going to be like, yeah, I just don't believe in God, fuck it. You know what I mean? Like, so, but without making people angry. So, I mean, I think if you're just, as long as you're honest with yourself and you're not changing what you believe to be true just based on the attitudes of other people, or that you're scared that you'll lose them as a friend or as a relative or something like that, as long as you keep that in, that's okay, and you can gauge the level of conversation and just be polite, and there's no need to go to the antisocial element, I think. I mean, I think that's just, yeah, sorry.
I think it's a case of line drawing, and different existentialists draw the line in different places.
Mm-hmm.
And but I think some existentialists would definitely call that inauthentic, right? Just, you know, repressing your feelings, your true feelings, which you really feel inside, and sublimating it because these stupid other people, you know, who you have to cater to for some weird social more, are just suppressing themselves for some reason, right? Sorry, suppressing yourself for them for some reason would be, for some of them, inauthentic. But I think it's a case of line drawing.
Yeah, I think he just, like, Jaspers just doesn't want that social, like, veneer, right? Because he seems to, if he wants people to communicate with each other, but he's against sort of dogmatic thinking, it's like, it's fine to even have huge communities of people that talk to each other, but just everyone's allowed to be a dick, I guess, you know? Like, you shouldn't be afraid of offending people for having a new view. And I agree with that, if that's kind of what he's shooting for.
It's being a dick in a structured way.
Yeah. Being a polite dick.
Podcast.
I truly think that is the sentiment behind his idea that you need this correspondence. I think it's just friends to call you on your bullshit. I think that's the only function of it. I don't think it's impossible to arrive at this transcendent state on your own. I think that he needed it. Anyway, I'm just restating what I already said.
He does make a point, though, doesn't he, about like the concept of existence that. So actually, this will be good if see what you guys thought about this. That it sort of required interaction between people to even develop that, like to develop this kind of self that he's talking about. So, like, do you think, you know, you can't exactly be like a Buddhist monk and go off into a cave for 5 years and come back and have existence? That felt like that would be impossible, right?
Depends what you're doing in the cave, right? If you're
Well, he makes it very clear, as I think Wes brought up on the podcast, that if you remain in solitude for too long, then ultimately you're going to be sabotaging yourself. So Jaspers obviously doesn't feel that way, but I think he's just posturing. I think he's just puffing up his chest. He doesn't actually feel that way. He's just trying to make it more palatable to critics of his.
right.
I mean, does it also go back to the idea of needing people to sort of to call you on your bullshit, that if you decide that in order to be authentic you're just going to go and live in a cave somewhere, well then, like, you're never really required, you're sort of skipping your responsibility to actually put your philosophy into action, right? You're just you're ducking your duty to sort of engage with people and to have people tell you whether what you're doing is authentic and legitimate, or is that a misinterpretation?
No one can confirm you. No one can confirm that you're doing anything, I guess. That seems important, that other people, it's still social.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it makes it easier. I think it makes it more difficult, but I guess the ultimate goal of this process is to arrive at this transcendent state, to have that Augenblick moment, to experience eternity in a fleeting second because you've lived this fully authentic life. And I wonder if what your friends think of you even matters in that case. I'm not refuting the idea that correspondence with your friends could help the process. I'm just saying it's not necessary.
Sorry.
Oh, I think.
When people are talking about solitude, right? I think a lot of them would agree that we are to a large extent social beings, and to isolate yourself from any social interaction would be an act of self-denial, right? I mean, it feels as if artificially separating yourself from all milieus and denying all parts of your so quote unquote constructed identity, and sort of not talking to anyone ever again, as self-denying as, say, blindly participating in church rituals and, believing that nonsense or whatever.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, the confirmation bias definitely is destructive in both cases. It's a really good point.
Because it seems because if you're being either if you're French or you're German, man as a social being is a big thing over there, right? So
it's unclear to me whether transcendence, as Jaspers talks about, is shooting for this momentary Augenblick, like you were talking about, Steve. That it seems, he's so consistently, he takes all the ammunition he can get from other philosophers about being self-critical and improving yourself. So there's the Socratic know thyself and undergo this process like that happens in Platonic dialogues. There's the Hegelian, you only know yourself insofar as another person has reflected on you. So he's at least got those two things going and more. So it's unclear to me, certainly that builds some kind of ethic out of it, an existentialist ethic, but whether that is shooting for the same thing that Buddhist enlightenment is shooting for, I'm not really sure, even though he uses the same term transcendence that they might use.
Yeah, I would definitely say no, and I'm sure this is something that other people have raised, but I kind of wanted to raise a mild and good-humored protest at the loose way that references to Buddhism were tossed around in the podcast. That's a very specific tradition, and there's a whole lot of different things said about enlightenment. It's very different between different schools of Buddhism, and I think that I'm getting off topic here, but if
I kind of got the same feeling. It's hard to talk about Buddhism broadly, right?
One of my favorite pastimes in this world is to get berated by an older, wiser man than myself. Please ridicule me.
That's why you read philosophy.
I want my self-esteem to be lowered 2 bars after this. Go ahead, Alan.
Oh, no, I have.
It wasn't.
I think I should let it drop there, unless.
Right. It was in the podcast, and it was because this was something that a connection he kept making, and that I thought was interesting that he even kept making it, in the discussion on modern day philosophers, which is what hooked me on to him and why he was on the show with us in the first place, and just thought that was an interesting connection. It was one of those things that I felt like if we were going to treat it, we'd have to treat it with a different episode or 6. So just let it be said and let it pass.
Yeah,
true.
Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah, very true.
All right. Anybody have a question? Seems like we're in this interim between an hour and an hour and a half when we're all starting to think about getting on with our lives. Moving on from Jaspers.
Point. Whatever people want to do.
There's notes here.
We have some closings. Do we start on the closing?
The closings.
Wow.
Okay. Well, I'd like to say something. Well,
go ahead.
So Jaspers. I'm sorry. I'm making somebody else talk. It's kind of making it difficult for me to talk.
I have to say, I've always found the closing the most intimidating seeming part of these episodes. I've never imagined I'd be able to come up with anything coherent to say for a closing, and I'm about to prove that, I think.
I should say it's, personally, it's because I usually have a big sheet of notes, so that I'm looking at it and like, oh, we didn't get to talk about this whole topic. I'll at least bring that up, toss that out there in a way that it won't be discussed properly as a closing, or it's something that I've just been itching to say. So there's a variety of ways that it could come about, but it's mostly just if there was anything left on the plate that you think from the episode that occurred to you that like, oh, we haven't talked about this yet, or we could talk about more about the Buddhism thing, but I don't know how productive it would hear.
I've got a question. Just looking at, I have a couple notes. It felt like he's advocating like he's continental and he does sort of fall into the history of ideas thing, but he really seems almost like analytic actually, because he wants to read. He says something like Plato's still alive today, like with Hegel and all of these people, like which also seems ahistorical. Like, did anyone else have an opinion on that? Like, he wants to kind of unite everything, and he doesn't want to read, like, for instance, like, you could read ancient Greek in the context of, this is how the ancient Greeks thought, and they were pretty different from us, and maybe, don't read them, through a modern lens, but he really does seem to want to read them, like, analytically, logically. What was everyone else's take on that, or did that seem odd to you at all?
Sorry, when he makes
definitely wants to read them, I would say ahistorically. He imagines all the great philosophers sitting in this one room, sort of all talking to each other and all talking about the same thing. And yeah, I think that is in a sense to read them analytically.
Like he's sort
I recall
sort of perennial.
Ava Brand said the same thing when we were in our Heraclitus discussion with her, that she really wanted to make it so that we weren't just, yeah, okay, you have to kind of learn about who he was talking to and what was going on historically, but you do that to sort of allow him to speak to the present, and that her whole book, you know, of course Heraclitus is exceptional because he didn't even write a whole freaking book. It's just like a bunch of fragments.
Or he did, but all we have is the fragments.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, but I think that's in general, I think she's coming from this tradition that Heidegger was central in, and Jaspers and Gadamer that I'm reading now is all about this. Like Gadamer addresses this explicitly, that the hermeneutics before him, like Schleiermacher, he thought was all about trying to get past your personal hang-ups, your personal prejudices in the moment, and see things from an objective perspective that you could then grasp it historically in the way it was meant to. And Gadamer, at least, and I think maybe you could attribute to this to Jaspers, thought that that was naive, that of course you can't get beyond your current perspective, but there's still ways in which you can charitably engage with these figures from the past and, you know, understand the history enough so that these things aren't impediments,
Right.
but still try to make them speak to the present. That ultimately you shouldn't have to teach exactly in chronological order, because you'll only understand this if you read the person before him and knew what he was responding to.
Right, and with the thought that it'd be a lost cause to try and inhabit people from 2,000 years ago, I guess. Sorry, go ahead, Alan.
I need to clarify something I said a moment ago. Yes, in a sense, with the analytic reading of the philosophical tradition and this hermeneutic reading that Eva Braun comes out of, they are both ahistorical, but in other respects they are very, very different. The way analytic people, when they get interested in the history of philosophy, read the ancient texts is I think they look for something that's recognizable as a philosophical problem, preferably one that can be set out in 4 or 5 propositions in which there's an apparent contradiction, and then you have to set about resolving the contradiction. Whereas the people like Eva Braun, who, I mean, yeah, she's related to Eva Braun's point of view. Comes from
Brand, it's not Braun.
Okay, Brand.
I think the same. Yeah.
I know the woman, but yeah, it comes from this guy Jacob Klein that she was associated with for many years, who was himself a student of Heidegger. And yeah, they're the idea somehow this ancient text is supposed to directly leap off the page and speak to your life. And I have real problems with that, but perhaps we should go into that.
I think Jaspers, in another context, talks about this as it's not going to leap off by itself, but it's sort of like it provides one leg of the running, and you have to provide the other leg. And so learning this skill of how to read in this way is a whole deal that you can't just explain in a paragraph. That, you know, you pretty much, if you want to get it from Jaspers, you'd have to read his books about other philosophers and see how he does it, and sort of learn by example.
Question: Did Jaspers write books about other philosophers, like focusing on specific philosophical texts, studies?
Yes, I mean, so he has a 4-volume, like, The Great Philosophers series.
Yeah.
Oh,
I got a couple out of the library. I didn't actually have any time to read them, but I saw that, like, here's a whole thing on Jesus and Buddha and Plato and Hegel and all these people, and he did, you know, like you said, he wanted to make them speak as if they were contemporaries, but of course then you have to really dive in and be very careful.
Yeah. I find the view of any important philosopher on the history of philosophy interesting, not so much because it gives me any accurate idea of what the other guys are thinking, but it gives me an idea of how he sees the history of philosophy. So the best example for this, for me, is Bertrand Russell's History of Western Philosophy, which is, I think, notorious by now to be completely inaccurate, but it gives
It's
you
a wonderful interpretation of Kant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very uncharitable to Nietzsche as well.
So reading or rather, more accurately, watching what Heidegger thought about Marx, or rather, you know, when he does his little 1-minute dialogue on the philosophers of only, it gives you a nice idea about Heidegger and less so about Marx, right? It gives you, because it feels that every philosopher is, or every big philosophical movement, whether it be existentialism or logical positivism, somehow rejigs the history of philosophy. There's always this guy in the movement who says that, you know, the entire history of philosophy have been talking about X and Y, and they've had different ways to put together X and Y, and we've transcended that conflict in some way, right? It feels that in the case of logical positivism, right, you know, you can dismiss philosophy from Plato to Hegel as, you know, talking about unverifiable stuff, right? But that doesn't tell you anything about Plato or Hegel. It tells you a lot about logical positivists.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a really good point.
And then it becomes a question as a reader, like, do you want to spend time reading Jaspers or Walter Kaufman, you know, writing extensively about these other people? You know, is that going to give you the best insight on them, or on, you know, on the author or the person they're writing about? You know, we've resisted for the most part doing an episode on, even though some of these philosophers are most famous for doing, you know, Gadamer's most famous thing is like philosophy and Freud, but we're not going to do that as a, you know, unless we just did a Freud episode and we want to do it as a way, you know. So we did it once with the Lacan talking about Edgar Allan Poe as an example of like weird ass Lacanian analysis. And I think for Derrida we're going to have to do the same thing when we do a real Derrida episode, that we're going to have to do, you know, read Plato's Phaedrus and then do Derrida about Plato's Phaedrus, because from what I recall, like most of the stuff that Derrida wrote, and the way to really get a handle on his method is to look at examples of how he hashes through these other people. But I've generally had a fairly low tolerance overall for spending a lot of my time reading these original sort of secondary sources. It's like it's neither helping me understand the primary source as going to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy would be, and it's not reading a primary source either. So like where
you guys should do a hatchet job on Bertrand Russell's History of Western Philosophy. Page by page by page by page.
That would be an interesting like a short interlude or something series.
Because that still gets recommended, you know, like as you're at top universities, what should you read? Think by Simon Blackburn and Bertrand Russell's History of Western Philosophy.
Do you think there's any sort of value to it being a catalyst towards the more deep understanding of the subjects? Do you think it serves as a, you know, I mean, giving you that skeleton that you can then flesh out and understand which pieces of that skeleton are ultimately bullshit?
So the Ayn Rand kind of value, like as a gateway drug.
Yeah, exactly. I wonder if we're talking about educating people, like what the most... I'm just talking about if we're educating people and we're taking them from a baseline where they never consider philosophical or theoretical thought at all to a place where they are you. I don't know. I wonder if there's any value to having that sort of broad strokes initial understanding and then you sort of piece together the accurate.
I think so.
I hope so.
Yeah.
As long as it's not the Fountainhead.
Yeah.
As long as it's not the first.
I read the Russell History of Western Philosophy and really liked it, and then like
that's the danger.
That got me interested. Yeah, so it's so readable, and
too.
For like a couple of years, that was probably my interpretation of most of the philosophers I read was Russell's, and then gradually I started to read actual texts and realize how far off and how very uncharitable he is about quite a lot of them. But yeah, I don't think I would have read Nietzsche probably if I hadn't read Russell first. Probably wouldn't have looked into some of the pre-Socratics if I hadn't read Russell first.
But I wonder how that ties in, though. Like, do you think, like, it seemed to me from just skimming through these essays, like, to get a good hold of Jaspers, like, I feel like I need to read like, half or more of his work, maybe all of his work.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Alan was talking about, like, how the analytics get into it, and that is actually what I'm used to reading is, you know, here's a quote, but then here are the points we're going to lay out, and then we're going to try and solve the problem or show a paradox or something. And it definitely felt like, man, I'm not going to get his sort of meta point on philosophy just from reading these essays. Like, I'm going to get a vague idea, but I'm not going to, like, you know, if I'm going to get a takeaway, it's going to be after reading, like, a huge work of his. That's what I felt like. Like, is that required, do you think?
For Jaspers in particular?
Yeah. Like, I feel like it's probably the same with Kant, right?
I was not satisfied reading just, you know, that's why I felt like I had to read more. You know, so I read little parts of several books just to get, and I'm actually thinking about starting a not school group for next month, on Truth and Symbol is an excerpt from one of his longer works, so it's published as its own thing. I was just looking at it last night and ordered the book, so I think I'm gonna try to. If anybody you wanted,
Yeah, I'd be interested in reading a long form, because honestly, usually some like analytic essays you can come out at the end and go like, oh, like I agree or I disagree, but I couldn't really form that sort of opinion with Jaspers.
Yeah, and as we started with, I think that's it. I mean, to some extent by design. But anyway, does anybody else have anything to say? Is this? Do we have any other questions? See, as a host, it's my job to see. When I was in the 6th grade, my teacher, Mrs. Knox, told me that if there's one thing I'm good at, I'm not good at many things, but if there's one thing, it's asking clarifying questions and keeping things on track. I think that makes me a good, host. Somebody to keep things organized.
Should we have Stephen do more of these?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Totally.
Okay.
That's the plan.
That's a little bit like holding an election in Germany when Hitler's standing there right next to you voting.
I'm concerned that your teacher told you in the 6th grade that you're not good at many things.
Yeah, it was depressing, to be honest with you. I was in a dark place for a long time. Was a gypsy around the country. Anyway, I realized I can ask clarifying questions about philosophy, and here I am. It's the only thing I'm even remotely qualified at. Anyway, actually, that's not true. I honestly think that slowly but surely I will become a relic of the past in this. Mark's going to realize I am grossly underqualified. And I'm kind of like I don't know, I feel like a barnacle on the side of a whale right now. Like, you guys are the greatness. You guys are having the great conversation. I'm just kind of symbiotically sucking sustenance off of you and living my life over here. Anyway, if there's nothing else that we want... sorry, I'm echoing that. If there's nothing else that we want to talk about, should I close this out, Mark? Or do you have something to say?
I'm satisfied. Thanks, everybody, for showing up. I hope we do a lot more of these things. I hope that after Steve, when we're done with the editing and posting of this, and then you feel like you're still energized to do more of these. And so next time, I think we're planning on posting a section of this on the 10 minutes, highly edited, so it sounds like a real episode. On the podcast feed is the idea, and then just to try to get people to sign up for Not School and listen to the whole thing, because we're not going to bother to edit the whole thing, and so we can't put it on the phone.
Of course.
With people, unless you all want to buy a $200 microphone, then go put it on the full feed. But hope to get more people involved in this next time. We'll really promote the one for Whitehead that I think Dylan will be on instead of me, which is why he was on just for the beginning this time, to sort of check out what it was like, what was going on, the technical stuff. But I think this is a good model. At least I found it fun.
Yeah, this was fun.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
And I want to see each and every one of you back here next time asking questions. And any of you 7 or 8 viewers on YouTube, you guys need to join the discussion. You can do that by going to the Not School group. We're going to send out links. You can find out how to participate there. And, this has been the Partially Examined Life After Show. Thank you for listening. Talk to you next time.
Yeah, I want to encourage folks, if you had comments about this discussion, you could still sign up for the go into the Not School group, and there's a forum there, so you guys can keep having a discussion, amongst yourselves or with people that were not on this recording today. Go as long as you want.
That's good information too. All right, guys. Cool. Talk to you all next time on Whitehead. See you then.
All right.